Here are 10 mistakes that can make your documentary film look and feel cheap. But first, let's clarify what I mean by cheap. I'm not talking about a film being made on a low budget, because even a documentary with high-end equipment and a huge budget can still come across as sloppy or unpolished if it's poorly crafted. On the other hand, an independent project made on next to no budget can feel incredibly high quality and professional if it's thoughtfully executed. The main difference lies in technique and how you craft your story, both during production and during the edit. Also, hi, if you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. The first mistake that documentarians make is that they cast the wrong character as the protagonist of their film. I think that happens a lot in documentary filmmaking because we don't like to talk that much about casting. We think of it as something that narrative films deal with, actors, actresses, celebrities, the right person for the right role. I'd say most of us recognize how important that is for fiction films, but so many documentarians don't realize how crucial it is for nonfiction storytelling as well. Now, there are a few areas that I think a lot of documentarians go astray on this one. The first is that, plain and simple, the person you chose to feature is just not interesting. They have no screen presence, no charisma. They don't seem passionate or inspired to chase after anything. And so in the end, they're just not very likable, relatable, or compelling. Now the result is that audiences will be bored and wonder, did you just choose the first person who said yes to letting you follow them with a camera? The second area where documentarians go wrong on character is they cast someone who isn't close enough to the story. If you're telling a story about social justice issues or climate change, don't focus your story on the researcher sitting in an office or a lab. Sure, that voice might help add context to the story, but that shouldn't be the main character of your film. Who is being impacted most by the issues you're looking to cover? It's more challenging to get access to filming with someone in prison or their family, or filming someone whose home just burned down in a wildfire. But that direct proximity to the subject matter is what elevates a production. And the third area I see filmmakers going wrong on this is not understanding what the person they are filming can provide to the story overall. Here's what I mean by that. Documentary stories have a bunch of different forms of sound bites. You got moments of exposition, or background information on the characters and setting. Moments of emotional honesty, moments of reflection, which can give the story more stakes. And these sound bites can come from a range of people who have different proximity to the story you're telling. Are they experiencing it firsthand? Are they an observer? Are they a friend? A subject matter expert? You need to think about all of this before your interview. Don't just approach everyone you're interviewing with the same types of questions. Think about what types of quotes the person you're interviewing is best suited to provide. If you're talking to someone who thinks big picture, ask them big picture questions like what this specific story says about the human condition in general. If you're talking to someone with an amazing memory for details, get them to walk you through moments in chronological order. Is the person funny? Are they wise? Are they reflective? Consider all of these qualities when you think about the role that they will play in the story, and thus what kind of questions you can ask to get the sound bites you want to get from them. Here's the overall message on this first mistake, and why I spent a while on this one. If you get your casting wrong, you'll get your film wrong. Also, there's a link in the description to a full video I made about casting characters, so if you're interested to dive deeper into this, click on that video. All right, on to the second mistake, which can make your film look and feel cheap. You rely solely on telling the story without showing it. By now you've probably heard the saying, show, don't tell. And it can sound so cliche that you might have a tendency to tune it out. But I'm telling you, this is a massive problem in documentary filmmaking. Briefly, I will illustrate what this means. So let's imagine it's back in 2020 and you're telling a story about a family whose son was on one of the first cruise liners where COVID broke out. He spent 1 month in quarantine at this scary and unpredictable time before reuniting with his family. And you're telling the story of that reuniting. So you could interview the family and they could tell you, it was such a relief when we reunited, such an amazing moment after our son finished his quarantine at a military base in Sacramento. Okay, this is telling. The participant is telling you what they felt, telling you what happened. The alternative is showing, like I did in this story for the Washington Post back in 2020.
He says he's by a Walmart and Columbia Sportswear or something. So, let's go. Let's roll. There it is right there. Ha ha. Oh yeah! Oh yeah! That is awesome, man! So good to see you. Oh jeez, is that you?
There's me.
Telling me, is that you? Oh, what?
Oh my gosh,
a freaking
dude.
old man here.
Oh
What
my
the heck?
That is thick. I was not ready for that. Oh man.
Showing something happening in real time is always more compelling than telling about that same thing. It's more immediate, it's more truthful, and brings audiences into moments that only documentary filmmaking can. Of course, it's also much more challenging to be where critical moments are happening, both logistically and technically. But if you can make it happen, it will pay off in how your story resonates with people. All right, the third mistake filmmakers are making is letting their gear dictate how they shoot a story. If you just bought a new drone or new gimbal or new lens, notice how tempting it can be to lean on it to create your film. It's so tempting to justify dropping a bunch of cash on new gear by using it in a project, even if the story doesn't warrant it. Honestly, I feel like this happens at the highest levels of doc production. Just because a production can use fancy gear does not mean it should. I don't know if anyone saw the documentary Will and Harper that came out this year featuring Will Ferrell, but to me, it was a perfect example of how gear and money was actually a disservice to the film. Now, this was a documentary meant to be a raw look at a friendship evolving when Will Ferrell's friend Harper comes out as a trans woman. And nothing about how that story was shot was raw. The production was so polished, so clearly well-financed. Gimbals, drones, car-mounted cameras on the highway. It was beautiful, but in my opinion, nothing about how it was shot matched the vulnerability that it was supposed to explore in this friendship. I would have rather that film been shot on shaky DSLRs or phones. So a documentary with Will Ferrell didn't feel like a fictional film about Will Ferrell. So don't make this mistake. Let the story dictate your means of documenting it. The fourth mistake that is cheapening your film is clipping of highlights, especially with skin tones. Please don't overexpose your image. Please don't wash out your subject's skin tones so that all the important details are lost. I am begging you. I don't know if there's a technical element of cinematography beyond the understanding of basics like aperture, shutter speed, and ISO that signals careless more quickly than this one. Just remember, more often than not, your subject is going to be the most important element of your frame. And their skin is pretty damn important, so don't overlook the exposure there. Learn how to read your monitor. Or if you want to get fancier, learn how to read a histogram or a waveform or a false color grid. Learn how to shoot in a log picture profile so that you have more control color grading in post-production. Do whatever you got to do to get accurately exposed skin tones, even if that means maybe underexposing at times. I would rather have that every time. There used to be this trend in cinematography of overexposing images for log conversions, but nowadays you really don't need to do this. Err on the side of underexposing. That's my opinion. Might be controversial, but that's my opinion. Because then if you completely fuck it up, at least you can claim you were doing so for like a film noir drama tone. Okay, number 5, unnecessary clutter. Now, a little bit while back on the channel, I had my friend and colleague, Thomas Rao, fellow National Geographic Explorer, and we talked about the elements of cinematography. And one of the ones that resonated with audiences the most was when we talked about minding your corners. Essentially, before you click record, you are looking at every inch of your frame to make sure that everything is intentional in that frame. So often what I see documentarians do is they get their interview set up, they push record, they start asking their questions, and only when they get back to their apartment, put the footage on their computer, see it on that big screen, do they see, There's clutter in the background. There's a little outlet in the background. There is that little light or that little exit sign. Unnecessary clutter in your frame. So my advice to you all is, if you want to elevate the production value of your film without spending any more money, it's just being more intentional with everything in your frame, especially when you're doing interviews, which are the moments when you have the most control. The sixth mistake that signals cheap is that you're not filming from a variety of angles and perspectives. When I come onto a project as a cinematographer, I'm always trying to think of, how can I get the audience to pay attention? How can I get them to really be present and look at what I'm showing them? One of the ways that I try my best to do this is by giving people unique angles and perspectives to view the world. Maybe that is as simple as getting the camera into a space where there isn't typically a camera. That is a new perspective on the world. But it can also mean just grabbing different angles. Instead of shooting right here where, everyone's eye level is, maybe it's getting down on the ground and filming something from ground level. Maybe it's getting up on a ladder and shooting something from above. Maybe it's cutting between multiple different camera angles or focal lengths to make people feel like they're seeing a scene or an image from wide, mediums, tights, details, in a way that when they move through the world, they never get to access something like that just as a passerby walking down the street. It is your job to give people a new way of seeing the world through how you film. And if you don't do that, if you're not making that intentional decision to get people to see things differently, it's going to bore your audience, it's going to cheapen your film and cheapen the experience for those viewing. On to number 7. We could call this lucky number 7, but I feel like we're doing mistakes, so it should probably be unlucky number 7, and that is bad audio. Whew. There really is no excuse anymore. I could see there being an excuse, a decade or two ago, but nowadays it feels like every single camera company at least has a low-end lav mic that, even if you are showing the lav mic that you're wearing it, you can just clip on to your sweatshirt or a shirt and get clean audio. If that's what you got to do, if that's what you have budget for, do that. But we have gotten so accustomed as consumers, as people who watch movies, or as people who just are seeing footage on social media all the time, we have come to expect clean audio. And if your documentary film does not have clean audio, people are not going to take it seriously. Straight up. All right, I have some videos on my channel of boom mic techniques, of lav mic techniques, but this is an area where you should invest, where you should learn, make that a starting point in your documentary film journey, because once you have solid audio, that is where you build from. That's the foundation that you can build from. So nail your audio, because if you don't, people are gonna stop watching and stop taking you seriously very fast. Mistake number 8 is your story is too long. I wanna be careful on this one because I have an interesting relationship and think a lot about the length of stories and the length of documentaries. And one of my fears is that as attention spans in this social media era get smaller and smaller and smaller, that everything made these days, including documentary films, are going to continue to get tighter and tighter and tighter and have less room to breathe. And that is not what I'm talking about on this one. I think it's so important for the documentary art form to give space for breath and reflection and silence. So that's not what I mean by too long. What I mean in this case is that your story, you are just not taking the time to carve away the excess, leaving the undeniably important. The process of telling a true story is one of gathering as much as you can and then chiseling away at that stone to only leave the essential. And if you have superfluous details or scenes or dialogue, what is essential is going to be lost. And that is when your film is going to start looking cheap and careless and sloppy. So think about when you're in post-production. How can you get rid of all those ums and ahs and filler words? How can you cut away at lines of dialogue where someone is saying essentially the same thing back to back, or essentially the same thing a couple lines from each other? There's so many films I see that where it's like, that person has already said that quote. Why do you need something so similar to it right next to it? Cut away, reduce, reduce, reduce. Stop using that banger shot of B-roll you got all the time, all over your film in different sections. Okay, it's all about trimming down and getting it as tight as possible and then giving it a little bit moment to breathe. Okay, but don't make your films too long, full of repetitive shots, quotes, and fillers. All right, mistake number 9, I'm gonna call this one over editing. I do believe that this comes, again, from the world of social media production, sizzle reels, and it's seeping into the documentary art form. And that is when people don't have a strong enough story, strong enough characters, good enough scenes, all the things we've already talked about, they feel like they need to over-edit and make the edit exciting through artificial means. You know what I'm talking about here. You know when you're watching something and it has ridiculous transitions. It has like one of those zoom transitions or the wipe transitions, or like the one I see all the time is like the sun flares or light leaks that come in to transition between scenes. Or even documentaries where they're cut so fast, no single image has any room to just stick on screen for a second. If you're doing that, not only is that in itself cheapening your documentary production, but you need to take a good hard look at the story that you're telling. Because to me, that's overcompensation in the edit, and it just ruins stories. So please, please tell a story that doesn't need the light leaks, the transitions, the cuts every half second. Find a story that can stand on its own with simple edits and simple transitions. All right, and mistake number 10 is overbearing or distracting music. Music is such an incredible tool in documentary storytelling, in film in general. It can elevate a scene in a way that little can. But if you're making the wrong choice with your music, if you're not nailing your tone, if you are bringing in music that is too heavy-handed, it can be so distracting and absolutely take the audience out of the moment that you're trying to bring us in. So be very careful with your musical choices and err on the side of subtlety. The music should convey the feelings that are not seen on camera, but you do not need to be too overbearing about it. Just nudge us. Just nudge the feeling. Just slide it in there. Don't go overboard. And don't go overboard with your volume as well, unless it's very intentional. A lot of times people make mistakes where their volume levels of their sound production, their music, their sound effects just overshadows the dialogue. The dialogue has always got to come first. It's the foundation. If you overdo it with your music, you are going to be sorely disappointed with how your film resonates with audiences. All right, that's it from me. Hope this helped. If you have more specific questions, feel free to book a one-on-one consulting call with me where we'll take an hour over Zoom to go over whatever would be most helpful for you. So the link for that is in the description. I'll see you next week. Go out and tell some stories.